Do you know this man? Well, he's at the epicenter of a very public, very toxic dispute between employee and employer. And I believe this saga can teach us all a great deal about how and how not to go about quitting your job. Let's delve into this absolute debacle. I want to build a community here. So on that note, I want to ask you, yes, you, if you're familiar with the Alexander Isak story, what's your opinion on him, his actions, and how do you see this all unfolding? I think that the only place we can really and truly start off is with the facts. Now, a great many of you out there will know who Alexander Isak is, but for those that don't, he is a 26-year-old Swedish football player who was signed by Newcastle United Football Club in 2022 for £63 million on a contract lasting 6 years. Under the management of club coach Eddie Howe, legend, he has since performed exceptionally well for the football club, and his market value as a football player, as well as his appeal to other bigger football clubs, have increased massively. Speculation over his future and which team he will play for in the coming years has been rife, and for some considerable time now, he has indeed been linked with a move away to other clubs, notably Arsenal, but more concretely Liverpool, who made an informal approach for the player in July of this year. Now, the player in question missed a pre-season friendly match on the 19th of July with Celtic. Manager Eddie Howe, legend, stated that this was essentially to remove him from all the noise surrounding him and his future. He was then a noteworthy absentee from the club's lucrative Asia tour, where they played teams in Singapore and South Korea. Amongst those teams were Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur. The official reason for this at the time was that Isak had a minor thigh injury. Whilst the club were in Asia, Isak took it upon himself to fly out to Spain to train at his previous club, Real Sociedad, and to use their facilities. More recently, it was widely reported that Isak had no intention of ever playing for the club ever again. In the background, speculation and debate continued to build and envelop Newcastle United, the wider club, and indeed the football world at large. And so, the Premier League season finally kicked off for Newcastle United last Saturday, 16th of August, and Isak was not in the named squad of players, let alone on the team sheet. Late into Tuesday night of this week past, Alexander Isak releases a statement on his Instagram stating that he feels promises were made by the club and that versions of events painted by various parties such as the media, pundits and fans do not reflect what was really said and agreed behind closed doors. And finally, Newcastle United released an official statement in response to this not long after Isak's post, denying any knowledge that he was going to post this, that no club official ever made a promise he could leave the club in the summer, that he is contracted to the club, that whilst they would support a move away from the club to fulfill his own personal ambitions, the conditions to allow that to happen have not yet been met. Well, damn, what a palaver. Is this the correct way of going about this? Is this the best way of essentially quitting your job? Again, I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Now, cards fully on the table. I am a Newcastle United fan, not sure if you gathered that by this point. So, of course, there is bound to be a little bit of bias, but I really do want to be fair, impartial, and balanced. Alexander Isak is one of the best football players in the world right now, and he is at the peak of his powers. He's at the peak of his career. As such, I do not for a second believe that he shouldn't have the opportunity nor the aspiration to go and play for bigger clubs, to try and win more trophies and personal accolades, and ultimately to make more money. Football players do, at the end of the day, have a very short career. With all of that said though, I am firmly of the opinion that this is not the way that Isak should have gone about this. I do not believe that the ends justify the means. And I think that there are important lessons that you and I, the average Joe and Joette, can learn about how to conduct oneself with decorum, respect, and propriety when seeking a move away from your employer to another job. So, what are those lessons? There is very little about Isak's conduct, both documented and undocumented, that can be construed here as professional. He has, in essence, down tools and is refusing to fulfill his contractual obligations, which I am sure include, but are not limited to, participating in training, engaging in media commitments, travelling with his club on a lucrative pre-season tour of Asia, and most importantly, playing with the damn team if selected. Was that 4 or 5? I don't know. He is, for all intents and purposes, on strike. This is a very well-paid man who is beholden to a legally binding contract that has 3 years left on it. Yet he appears to be in stark violation of it, which, to me, is tantamount to gross misconduct. For me, it is the sheer disregard for his teammates and his manager Eddie Howe, legend, a man who placed great faith in him by signing him from Real Sociedad for a club record fee of £63 million that I perhaps have the most difficulty understanding, rationalising or accepting. This entire debacle will undoubtedly have had an impact on the rest of the team. Their mindsets, their training, their preparation for matches, the conversations that they're drawn into in their everyday lives, as well as, of course, their social media interactions. Above all, his absence is already being felt, as we saw when Newcastle United drew against Aston Villa on the weekend in a match mostly dominated by Newcastle, where there were plenty of opportunities for a top striker to score. He is, basically, leaving his team high and dry, and the club are losing out because of it. This is not professional at all. I know that real life and your everyday typical employee are very different from the Isak situation. However, there are very basic similarities and shared principles too, in my opinion. If you or I were to be given verbal assurances that we would be promoted next year and be paid loads more money, of course we would be really excited and have every expectation that that assurance would be fulfilled, especially if our performance was outstanding. However, if the year passed and we, through whatever circumstance, missed out on that promotion and more money, we would naturally and understandably be upset, perhaps even aggrieved or extremely angry. Would that, though, give us the right to not go to work, but to expect to continue to keep our job and to continue to be paid? I'm asking you, genuinely, I'm asking you. In my opinion, no. No, it wouldn't. In this scenario, bloody lights run out of battery. It's on strike. Anyway, in this scenario, we must first continue to do our jobs, continue to turn up to work, fulfill our contractual obligations, not least because it's the right and frankly minimum requirement thing to do, but also because our colleagues depend on us. Instead of stooping to very base, very disruptive, very unprofessional tactics, we should counter a perceived wrong with right. To do otherwise is simply immature and petty. In that sense, we absolutely must maintain professionalism and be accountable, because what we leave behind will inevitably impact our path forward. In other words, be mindful of your behaviour and conduct at work, because you will, in some form or another, likely be at the mercy of character references and professional records. And on a more human level, you will either be perceived fondly and with admiration by your peers, or indeed, completely the opposite. Whether Alexander Isak secures his move to Liverpool this summer or not, for me, it is undeniable. His reputation is tainted now. The second thing that this whole mess can teach us is that it pays to employ the services of, listen to, and take advice from the right people. It's a well-known fact that the vast majority of professional football players employ agents to manage the business side of matters, from endorsements, sponsorships, all the way through to contractual advice, negotiation, and signing. Indeed, most players are so young that they simply do not possess the business and interpersonal acumen to manage all of these situations themselves. They rely on their agents to get the best deal possible and to secure as much money as they possibly can for them. This is not only in the interest of the player, obviously, but also the agent who takes a cut at the end of the day. So, let's take a look at what Alexander Isak has, or more pertinently, has not done. In his Tuesday 19th of August statement, Isak makes reference to promises from the club that were made and evidently not delivered on. This seemingly forms the basis for his entire exit strategy, In other words, this seems to be the reason he is acting the way that he is. For me, this speaks to a certain naivete, in so much that citing unfulfilled promises as a valid reason to not train, to not go on tour, to not show up, to not play for the club that employs him and pays him 140 grand in Great British pounds every single week is an oddly fascinating, deeply flawed, and ultimately hugely warped interpretation of reality. The realities of life, the realities of business, and the realities of the law. Verbal promises are worth very little. Yes, you might feel upset or offended or betrayed that certain promises have not been honoured, but unless you got that in writing, unless you got it in black and white, unless you got a contract, you have very little indeed, in reality, to stand on. For me, again, this is very poor judgment on the part of Alexander Isak and those closest to him who advise him. Isak has shown that he employs a substandard agent who is incapable of managing these processes in the correct manner, incapable of negotiating wisely or in a manner that's respectable, and an agent who is either incapable of looking after Isak's best interests or even worse, doesn't really care about them. There can be no other interpretation. At the end of the day, Newcastle United, his employer, holds all the relevant cards, a contract with 3 years remaining, legal precedent, and the moral high ground. And at this point in time, and I know I may very well be wrong, I do not see Alexander Isak being sold this summer. What he will have achieved, however, is the alienation of his teammates, his manager, Eddie Howe, legend, club, and fans. His professional reputation is muddied. Oh, for sure. Newcastle United will of course play him, should he decide that he wants to play, but the damage is done. So what's the lesson here? Don't take verbal agreements seriously. Seek written assurances. Get it in black and white. Ask your employer to revisit your contract and to make reasonable adjustments to it. And do so in a professional manner, in an amicable manner. Furthermore, we must show some wisdom in the friends and alliances that we choose and keep. There's a saying, you are the friends you keep. So do try to ensure you choose your friends wisely and purposefully. Are my friends advising me well? What is the general consensus according to others? Do they have my best interests at heart? I understand this can be very difficult, and we are all at risk of charlatans who seek to take advantage of us at any opportunity. And finally, I believe that in all things there should be a minimum level of respect. It's widely said that respect should be earned, and this is a notion I agree with. But there is also a minimum level of respect due in all interactions, a base level of respect for an average passerby, for example, an assurance that I won't invade their space, make life intentionally difficult for them, nor commit any illegalities against them. There is a base level of respect for properties, be they commercial or privately owned, a commonly accepted expectation that one will enter a property and treat it appropriately, not damaging anything, not making a mess, not stealing any goods or items, and generally treating it as they would their own home. This is the minimum and required level of respect expected when entering a property. Now, of course, we see every day in, day out, people doing the exact opposite, but the premise and the expectation remains the same. So too with Alexander Isak. For me, downing tools and not fulfilling his contractual obligations is at worst in direct contravention of the law, and at best, disrespectful. Okay, direct contravention of the law may be a bit extreme, but he is in direct contravention of a legal contract. He is an extremely well-paid man, taking home more in a week than most do in a year. Yet, because his expectations have not been met, and not been met for a good circumstantial reason, he is refusing to engage with his employer and to simply do his job. Newcastle United and Eddie Howe, legend, they gave this man the platform and the opportunity to showcase his talents in the biggest, most successful, most viewed, most lucrative football league on planet Earth. The club has made success for Isak possible, and £140,000 per week is certainly not chump change. Now, I know that the player himself is the one primarily responsible for his success. He is the one who has honed his skills and executed in the most effective way possible by scoring goals. But he is in a position of immense privilege. Let's not even get into how the fans feel. That sadly would take a whole other hour that we just don't have, unfortunately. But perhaps is the most important aspect of all of this. Because football, as a business, is nothing without the fans. Footballers, professional footballers, are nothing without the fans. I know that there are countless examples of employers treating their employees very poorly indeed. Bad conditions, substandard pay, poor treatment, unfulfilled promises, essentially most of the things that Alexander Isak is most likely complaining about. But my advice is always to take the higher ground, to be the better person, to retain dignity, and to act with a minimum level of respect at all times, especially for your employer, who gives you the money in return for a service to enable you to make ends meet. It is so easy to throw your toys out of the pram and to act with petulance, especially in the face of perceived poor treatment. But put quite simply, those that continue to treat their employer with a certain level of respect will always be the real winners in the end. It's only right to do so. Well, it's time that I wrap things up because I've yapped on about this for too long. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then it's only professional, of sound judgment, and respectful of you to hit the like button, surely. I know and fully expect there to be countering views and opinions, and I welcome them, but I do believe that this whole saga can teach us all a little bit about basic manners, decorum, and professional behavior. However, I am always open to hearing other points of view. There is, after all, a right way of doing things and a wrong way. In closing, if you're interested to see how this channel got started, do click the video on screen. But for now, I wish you all an abundance of health, happiness, and prosperity. And I'll see you in the next one.